Welcome to the Bottom Line on Brownfield. I'm anchor reporter Megan Grebner. Our content today is brought to you by the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. With us is Todd Wilkinson, president of NCBA, and Mark Eisele, president-elect of the association. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Hey, privileged to be here.
Glad.
It is a beautiful city we're in, beautiful weather. You've had a great meeting. Let's start first, Mark, and talk a little bit about some of the policy process, thinking about some of the issues that are facing producers today.
Well, our policies are always driven from the ground up. It's absolutely grassroots. So folks are dealing with an issue, having a problem in their country, their state. They bring it up to their local association, their state association, see if it's worthy, bring it to us, then we see if we don't have any policies that conflict or coincide with it, and then we get the discussion out there, we look to see if we can find a solution, and that's how it works. So it's important because that's what we do. We graze cattle, we market grass.
We are going to touch on some of those policies. Todd, I want to start with you. I think one of the big themes this week has been the conversation surrounding cell-cultured proteins. Talk to me about the association and the policy that your producers want to make sure is in place.
Yeah, and I got to say thank you to the producers for leading the charge with giving us both a resolution and a directive to our staff that clearly points out that we need to differentiate any cell culture product for what it is. It's not a natural product. It doesn't deserve to be called meat because it is not meat that God intended to come from the cow or that steer. This is something that somebody's growing in a bioreactor, and that just sounds awful to me. I mean, you look at this stuff, you listen to this stuff, and it almost makes you ill thinking you're having to eat this goop. But what we need to do is to have policy and have that policy go into law and regulation on the federal level so that those people that are trying to mislead the public about what this stuff in fact is cannot put it in that grocery store shelf under ground beef. We don't need it labeled so that the consumer doesn't know what they're eating. And I think that's the biggest concern that we're hearing from all across this hotel facility is that make sure beef is real beef and not some make-believe goop.
Mark, when we talk about the cell culture protein aspect of it as well, as a producer, you guys have spent time, effort, investing in genetics, in programs to put a high-quality product on the shelves for consumers. How do you tell that story as well to talk about why you pick real beef, grass-fed, grain-fed, whatever, opposed to a product like a cell-cultured protein?
Well, what we do is a natural process. It's sustainable. We produce a good product. Nature helps us with it. We understand where it comes from. We understand what it's gone through, how we bring it to the market. It's trustworthy. It's reliable. It's just a great, nutritious product. So that's different than something you raise in a lab or produce in a lab that you synthesize. And synthesize is a good word to cover that. We don't synthesize. We let nature do her work and we help her.
You bring up sustainability. Part of that, you and I have had several conversations about sustainability in the past. Part of that is grazing, conservation, those types of management. Talk to me about the importance of the policy that NCBA has, but the role that it plays also in production.
Well, everybody thinks they understand what sustainability is. The reality is it's working with nature. And everybody wants clean air, clean water. Ranchers and farmers do the same. We work in conjunction with that, and our policies help foster that, whether it's sustainability, production practices, environmental awareness, any of those kind of things. That's what we try to foster, that's what we try to encourage, and that's how we produce the product that we do.
Talk to me about the conservation conversations going forward. I know the Farm Bill, and we'll talk Farm Bill, Todd, here as well, but as that remains pertinent to the 2023 Farm Bill discussion.
Oh, absolutely. the grazing programs, and of course the threat of this conservation rule from the BLM is enormous. It has a huge impact. 40% of the cattle that are produced eventually run through some kind of public land setting. It's a good sustainable use. It's a fire management tool. It fosters these ecosystems for wildlife and water. And so it's got to be part of the equation. And the Farm Bill, of course, has provisions for conservation, assistance, disaster relief, those kind of things. So all those discussions around the Farm Bill, critically important, not just to the public, but of course to the producers.
The grazing issue with BLM has been an issue, that's not something that's new. Where is that disconnect, or where's that disconnect been?
The problem with this one is this was not then that went through the normal channels, went by the rules. This was literally cooked up in the back room by their own admission. They didn't address any stakeholders. They didn't talk to any of the rules in place for current management, which specifies multi-use. And it can actually threaten all the multi-use purposes that are out there: timber, mining, recreation, fishing, hunting, access in its general. Conservation is not a use of the land. It's already done with grazing of livestock. That's where it should stay, and that's how it should be maintained.
I would just add that it appears to me that this is a woke agenda coming out of DC, and they think that this is going to further their game plan. This isn't about the true use of BLM lands. This is trying to create a new use that's going to take existing uses off, and that's a real disingenuous way for the BLM administration to be handling this. To ignore the producers on the ground, and more importantly, to ignore their own staff on the ground and not even get their input, that just smells to high heaven. And frankly, this has got to be stopped.
So talk to me about the message that your producers have to have when they're having conversations about grazing, land use, and this misconception or disconnect with the BLM lands.
Well, they're going to start by talking about the fundamental law that created and defines what the uses are on BLM land. And the first thing that they're going to point out, anybody that's on public lands is going to point out right away, this concocted use of conservation easements, or leases, I should say, is not in the authorizing legislation and rules. This is something that they're coming up with completely without substance or origin, and putting that in there. So when a producer goes and talks to their local people, they just need to say, show me where this is authorized. Show me where you can even do this. Don't make up a rule and try and impose it just simply because you have some woke agenda as to why you're going to do this. This needs to be based on real law and real facts.
This was a cherry picking of the rules and regs. Producers and the managers that manage public lands, like the NEPA rule is a perfect example. We have to follow that to the letter. We have to have management give and take to see what's adaptive and what can use. This was completely disregarded. They asked for one thing, but they perform or act in a different way. There's a double standard there, and it's unacceptable. It's not good for the land, and it really doesn't have anything to do with the land. We think this is probably an agenda just to get producers off those lands.
I was going to go into the Farm Bill, but I think if we're going to talk about regulations that are cumbersome and burdensome to producers, I think it transitions better. We go into Lotus. A pretty solid win with the Sackett ruling, but that's not the end of that story. Mark, I'm going to start with you. As we talk about Lotus, this fight isn't over.
Not even close. It should be. But what has happened is the EPA and the Army Corps of Engineers have decided to go a different path. Instead of following the rule of the law that was laid out by the Supreme Court, they've decided to take this a different direction and rewrite their rules to cherry pick and maybe thread the needle to do what they want to do rather than what they did. And the problem is they punish producers who don't follow the rules, and they punish them arbitrarily to make examples of them from time to time. And it's an uneven application of the law.
So let's talk about where the Lotus Rule is now in terms of the courts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to tell you, just as I preface these remarks, I'm going to say that this is one of the reasons I'm an NCBA member, because we're in the fight on this. So we get a Sackett decision, wonderful decision, clears up a lot of ambiguity in the law for years. You would expect the EPA would pull back their rule and start from scratch. No, they're gonna try and fit a round peg into a square hole, and it isn't going to work. So what are we doing? We're back litigating again, and you know that takes money, and that's why I think NCBA is ideally suited to go in there, and we're fighting in the Texas court, we're fighting in the North Dakota venue, and we're going in there and say, hey, you got to take the Supreme Court's decision, and you got to fit those rules. We don't have this significant nexus test anymore. It's out the window. Your whole premise in making this rule was the significant nexus test. So I expect that they're going to give us some rule that is going to try and make a stretch to get back to where they were. And frankly, my personal opinion is we're going to see this rule challenged again, and we're going to go into the courts and we're going to win again, because the Supreme Court decision should tell them, this is your playbook, EPA, this is what you got to follow. And if you're not going to follow it, somebody's going to tell you that you have to.
So let's talk about a Lotus Rule that's acceptable and works for cattle producers. And I'm going to take both of your opinions. Todd, we'll start with you.
Yeah, farmers and ranchers are all over clean water, clean environment. I mean, that's the very livelihood that we live in. If we do anything that harms the ground or harms our livestock, that puts us out of business. So when you're talking to producers, you're talking to a true environmentalist to begin with, not some made-up hippie from some other part of the country. What you're talking about is producers that are going to be very compliant with rules that are clear, concise, and if I want to go do a fencing project on my land, this is what I need to follow. But don't try and regulate me out of the use of my land. That's where this whole thing got derailed a long time ago. Instead of trying to protect the land, what they did was use their rule to come in and try and take property rights. That's where the disconnect is in Washington. Do a rule that protects the environment, but allows the producer to use their tools that they've been doing for hundreds of years, and that they know, and that the government really knows, is an example of conservationism. Don't go in and think that somebody sitting in Washington, D.C. knows better how to do this than the people that are living off the ground.
You want a real definition of sustainability, a stable ecosystem, multi-generational farms and ranches. You can't do that by abusing your entity. You can't do that by abusing your natural resources. That's a true definition, and literally the government regs get in the way of us being able to do that.
Where does navigable waters come into this? How do we, is there, obviously I would assume maybe not a gold standard, but an acceptable rule was the navigable waters rule from the Trump administration. Is that what you want to see? Is there leeway in there? How do you get a rule in under this administration that works for you all?
Well, I think we have to start with the Sackett decision, and where the EPA had been before was some broad definition and major stretch. So there could be a body of water that is only in existence for a matter of hours or days as a result of a large rain. That's not something that they need to exert jurisdiction over. Now, the Missouri River, or the Columbia River, or even a defined stream or creek bed that is flowing, I always think of it, a navigable river means I can get in a canoe and I can paddle. And that's probably the simplest way to define it. No producer wants to harm the environment. And they are willing to deal with regulations that protect that to some extent. But to try and take a canoe and put it on a piece of dirt and hope it rains sometime in the next 10 years so that you could actually move it is kind of ridiculous.
I've actually been involved in public lands where those battles have been about water that they said were navigable. You could not get your lap wet by sitting in it. But it was ephemeral streams and rainfall events that they were basing that on. Completely erroneous, completely unreliable, and completely unfair to producers and the folks that make their livelihood off natural resources.
We're in a Farm Bill year. We are rapidly turning the calendar another month. Let's talk about priorities to get a Farm Bill done correctly and that works for producers of all aspects of agriculture. What do you need in it?
Well, I'm going to come out of the chute right away and tell you that I need a reauthorization of the foot and mouth vaccine bank. I need the veterinary and the state livestock inspectors to be able to be adequately funded to have a disaster preparedness plan. And we need something that really puts all the pieces together so that if we have a foot and mouth outbreak, if we have a lumpy skin disease, whatever the disease, so that there is something that operates at the speed of commerce. So quickly we can identify the source, trace the source, and not shut down everybody's ranch or everybody's farm because of something that's happened 2 states away.
Right.
You know, the atypical BSE case that happened in South Carolina just a couple months ago is a classic example of how it works. We found out that occurred, and that's a naturally occurring event. Very rare, but naturally occurring. The animal never got into the food stream. It was caught immediately. There was an EID tag in its ear. The animal was at the speed of commerce, traced back to its origin in Tennessee. All of the traceback rules happened very quickly. Now, you take that and you don't put that traceability piece in there, or you do it by paper, it's going to take longer. So the traceability component, coupled with the vaccine banks and the disaster preparedness, all work hand in glove to protect our cow herd. You know, the one thing I tell producers when I'm talking about that subject is, think about it like an insurance policy. This is to know that your ranch, your farm, is not going to be shut down for an extended period of time because you can prove your animals are free of the pathogen or the virus or whatever it is. So that's important. Not that I'm passionate about the issue.
And as you should be, and I feel like cattle producers are. You want to make sure there's a safe, affordable food supply at the ready for whomever needs it.
I think this has to do a lot with what Todd mentioned, the speed of commerce. Because in the event of a disaster, event that like a livestock disease outbreak, trucks will stop moving, quarantine areas will be thrown up. By the time it's sorted out, you've disrupted the entire chain of the food supply. Livestock can't get off the ranch, livestock can't get to the feeders can't take that stuff to the grocery stores. Producers and consumers are both in a real pickle on this deal. This is easy. In this day and age, we should be able to track, we should be able to catch those movements, and it's just part of anybody's good herd health management arrangement anyway. So let's just accentuate it, let's build on that, and make it user-friendly. And we think with confidentiality built into it, we're on the right page.
Any other priorities in the Farm Bill?
Oh gosh, lots of things. The conservation programs are enormous. Risk management programs are enormous. Some of the additionals like EQIP that helps with habitat and land management, those are enormous. The countermeasures bank that Todd mentioned, but we also want to add test kits so we can speed that process along. There's a few others.
Yeah, Mark touched on the livestock risk protection. To me, that has come light years in the last 10 years from where we were before with a product that was rarely used and really was not much good to the producer because it simply didn't derive the true insurance level that it needed, to now a product that is being under wide acceptance and is being used as a risk management tool for the producer. So similar to corn and beans, who have had crop insurance protections and risk policies for income, we need that same thing in cattle, and we're getting it. And we just need that to be maintained or improved a bit and put us on parity with corn, bean, and wheat. We're not asking for anything else that isn't out there. And frankly, we're willing to pay for the policy, the cost of it. But man, what a great tool to put in your toolbox when I'm looking at selling calves. If the bottom falls out of the market, I know that I'm not going to go completely broke. I have livestock risk assurance that's going to be there.
Here's to paying the premium and never having to use it.
Absolutely.
All right, we've talked about a number of headwinds and issues that have been facing the cattle industry and cattle producers. Not everything is doom and gloom, though. I mean, it is a fairly wonderful time to be involved in the cattle industry. I'm sure everybody would like to see input prices down a little bit, but talk to me about the state of the industry just in general in terms of, Mark, let's start with you, producer mentality, producer sentiment at this point.
Well, weather is always a huge factor, and we finally kind of got the pendulum to swing back for us. Most folks have had rain, they've got grass growing, they're feeling good about it, they're going to have hay production. The market is strong. Unfortunately, that's because the numbers are down, but there's opportunities now to build herds. There's opportunities to expand. You can do some diversity. I think there's some outstanding opportunities for some young producers to come in. If they're looking for niche markets, I think they can come in. They have a chance to step into leadership roles. I think there's some really good things happening in that regard.
I just got to say that as I've been crossing the country back and forth this year, there's a lot of smiles out there. I mean, sometimes we get caught up in all these problems and it gets kind of depressing. It is great to have guys and gals with some jingle in their pocket, and they're in for this. Isn't going to be a one-hit wonder. This isn't going to be a 14-15 thing. This is going to be a more prolonged cycle so that we can build back the herd, and that cow-calf guy and that feeder operator are all going to be able to benefit from this process. Mark touched on a point that I think is critical, and that is you finally have the ability to watch that young producer look at the horizon and see some hope. Maybe this is where I want to go. Instead of knowing that, man, I can't eke out an existence on this, on the little bit of return, now they see there's hope out there. This is where I can make a living for my family. So I encourage those young producers, because this is a great window to get started, to get out there and get into the cattle industry.
Todd, you took my thunder. But I do want to touch on the younger producers. How do you get them involved? Not just in the operations at home, but here, active within your organization, and highlight the change that they can make to set policy for their future.
Well, I think how you get them involved in an organization like NCBA or the state affiliates is first you demonstrate what you're doing. I mean, they want to see that there's a return on their investment, not so much of the dollars, but their time. Because if you're going to become an advocate, you want to know that the organization you're working for is producing results. And I can take open our playbook and I can show result after result, win after win after win, where we're on the offense and we're protecting that producer in whatever facet that they're in. And that then shows results. And so if I'm asked, why am I an NCBA member? Those are the things I point to. And I know I'm getting excited about this, but to that young producer, man, look at what we offer. But most importantly, look at your opportunities right now. This is your opportunity. Take advantage of it. You can actually make some decent money on this deal, and we don't rely on government subsidies for our money. We rely on our hard work and our land and our cattle to produce it. And that's the American dream.
You have to understand, when you join an organization, like, it may seem intimidating, but it's people that all have the same purpose and the same goal, and you need to do that networking. In our ranch, when we were having trouble or we were intimidated by a problem, when I went to the state affiliates, when I went to the national association like NCBA, I met people. I didn't have to know how to invent the wheel, but I did have to learn how to use it, and it got me out of scrape after scrape, helped us to build better herd, better cattle, better use, more efficient, adapt to new technologies. And young people like that. They like to adapt to new technologies. They're one of the biggest assets on a ranch. I also think we're going to see some generational transition here coming up, and there'll be opportunities if you're creative, finding a place you can buy into or lease, make arrangements to do some kind of cash flow, cash share, whatever, crop share. I think there's some great opportunities. And it's not just for the ranching and farm business, but also those local economies where they depend on stuff at the feed store, the grocery store, the truck dealership. So everybody can make out if you see those opportunities and you expand your opportunities. When you attend one of our conventions and you go to the trade show, you will see all those technologies. You'll see the availability of those sort of things. I always come away with a new idea. I always encourage my family and my younger members to come and look at that, and they go home with some great ideas. Maybe that'll work, maybe it won't, but we've seen it. It's priceless.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time today. We will see you in Orlando.
Absolutely.
I'm Megan Grebner with The Bottom Line in Brownfield, a content partnership with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Thank you for tuning in to our YouTube channel. For all the latest in ag news, markets, and weather, and for more great video content, go to brownfieldagnews.com.